Hi, folks. This is What's New Westford, the podcast where we talk about what's happening here in Westford. I'm Steve from WestfordCAT, here today with our news director, Joyce Pellino Crane.
Hello.
And joining us today is Westford resident Mark Minnucci.
Hi, guys.
At the recording controls today, we have Nick Woodbury. Thanks, Nick. The stories on today's rundown are the Board of Health decision to mandate masks across town in indoor spaces, the resulting protest on the Common that was protesting that mask mandate, and a logging plan at East Boston camps. As always, links will be in the description, and feel free to tell us what you think about these stories in the comments. So, Joyce, what's new in Westford?
Well, on September 22nd, the Board of Health did vote unanimously to mandate masks in any building in town. When you walk in, you need to have the mask on. So that happened. And then last night, which was September 29th, there was a small rally in the Common, but they got their message across. They all had signs saying things like no masks, the obvious. And we got a picture of that and wrote a story. It was breaking news for us.
Well, and so I covered that Board of Health meeting, and there were a fair number of people who showed up and had a lot of things to say. And the board just kind of went through one by one of all of the criticisms and said, this is the medical advice and this is the statistics that we're seeing. And some people were trying to cherry pick statistics. And I guess we are actually, in the last couple of weeks, the curve of the infection slope has been trending back down. But the overall monthly pattern is still trending up. And so it'll be good to, if we are kind of on the downswing, that'll be great. But I think it's a little bit too early to say whether we're on the downswing or not. And that's one of the things that the board was citing in their statistics, that, yeah, you can look at the last week and say we're on a downtrend, but if you look back farther, we're not. So it's kind of an open question, I think, at this point.
Yeah, it's very concerning. The Delta variant is out there, and we don't know what it's capable of.
Yeah, so I actually didn't know about the Board of Health decision until I started reading about it on town social media. That's the first time I actually heard about it on some of the Westford Facebook pages. But what's interesting here is there's flu variants every year, right? And I know these things are not apples to apples, but there's always new variants when you talk about a virus. And the longer we go without a control plan, the longer we'll be dealing with this forever and ever and ever. And I'm just as frustrated with masks as everyone else. I don't think anyone would say they're enjoying this. And we don't want to become one of those cultures where masks is the daily norm on subways and things like this. But if we don't invest the energy now, we're going to be talking about this 20 years. We'll be doing a podcast 20 years from now and saying, oh, there's the epsilon variant and the gamma variant and the zeta variant. And, there comes a moment where you just have to say we have to, suck it up now so future generations aren't having this conversation about this. Maybe they'll be having a different virus to deal with,
Yep. Well, and it's funny, just a week or two ago, I was watching a movie, The Big Short. And in that movie, they have Brad Pitt's character is a little bit of like a prepper who used to be a Wall Street trader. And to kind of show that he was a little over the top, they had him wearing a face mask in the airport as he's flying into Las Vegas. And back in 2015, I think that was kind of the common perception of masks on a flight is a little bit much. And now it seems to be kind of, that's where everything is going. And I would agree that I don't necessarily want to get to that point where it's masks everywhere all the time. And that's the culture.
Yeah. And so when you see on the news scenes from China or Japan pre-COVID, it's normal when you're sick in some cultures to wear masks, right? And I think about the days of school that my daughter lost. She'll be 7 in 2 weeks, and I think about in her short life, there's been several days she hasn't been able to go to school because of colds and the way the germs are transmitted in schools. And what a benefit it would be to society if we did make part of this a norm. When your kid has a cold, when you have the flu, taking precautions that we never took before. Hand sanitization and things like this. I think there's a huge societal impact, a positive one, that we don't talk about as much, about wearing masks and better hand hygiene and things like this.
I do have a question. Are you a scientist, Mark?
So I'm an engineer. Actually, I work at a company called Schneider Electric, and I'm a innovation strategist, and we look at the technologies that are coming, let's say 3 to 5 years in the future, and how many of those we can accelerate so that our company, which is in the energy management space, so that our company can take advantage and make those available to our customers sooner than projected.
How exciting that must be.
It's super interesting, yeah, and I feel like I'm contributing to the climate discussion and really trying to help with that. So a lot of really interesting technologies we work with, and just looking at the trajectory of technology is something I study all the time.
Interesting. So I guess one comment I read online from a parent was something about, the germs being held within the mask, and how and questioning how safe it is, to wear a mask all the time, not getting fresh air coming in.
Yeah, so I'm not a doctor. I should make that really clear.
Yeah.
But the truth is, if you have the COVID virus, even if you're vaccinated, and you could still carry the virus, right?
Mhm.
Those particles, those that are coming from our air, they're being trapped in the mask. Hopefully, the majority of them are being trapped in the mask. The masks we're wearing right now have slight openings on the top. But yeah, if you have COVID, those particles are getting caught in the mask, and they should be disposed of. I think I'm guilty of, not replacing masks frequently enough. I think some masks are not meant to be reused, and people don't have a clear understanding of that. So, most of these masks should either be disposed of or, put through the washer. And we don't do that quite frequently enough.
Well, and properly disposed of, not simply tossed out your car window. We've been seeing a little bit of pickup of mask litter in the parking lots around town. I know when I go to Chipotle or Subway, I occasionally see just a paper mask lying on the side of the road there, and I know litter is one of your causes. And
It absolutely is, Steve. And I've been running an anti-litter campaign in town since February, and I've been really impressed by the way the town's turned out. Actually, it's a great, interesting way to meet people. But you're right. Seeing if we were to do this 5 years ago, if we were to run a litter campaign in Westford 5 years ago, we wouldn't have seen surgical masks at all, probably zero. And yet this is an extremely common category of litter now to see. And you really shouldn't be picking it up with your bare hands. You should be using a gripper or gloves, because of what Joyce brought up is, these COVID particles they could be trapped into the masks themselves. But it's super interesting to see people don't want to carry around a used mask. They didn't want to wear it in the first place. And a lot of you mentioned Chipotle. So they just say, I'm done with this thing. I don't see a trash can. I'm done with it. I just want to throw it out. And, that's not healthy.
Yeah, and then we end up with masks all over the side of the road, and that's a problem.
That's right. That's an unfortunate byproduct that we don't think about.
Yeah, and getting back to the kind of the question of can things grow in the mask, that was actually something that was addressed at the Board of Health meeting. It came up as a criticism, and the board pushed back pretty hard on that, saying that people in professional settings, where like in hospitals, use masks for a few hours at a time and have never seen that sort of problem. But another kind of piece of that they mentioned was that somebody working at a hospital isn't wearing a single mask the whole day.
No.
They will take a break every couple hours and just go outside, take off the mask, have a few minutes to breathe, and then when they come back in, they put a new mask on.
Right.
And so I think there is something to be said for maybe carrying a couple different masks with you, and at the end of the day, when you get home, throw them in the wash. And you might need to own 4 or 6 masks to go through a rotation, so that you have 2 every day. If you're going to be wearing a mask for 8 hours at work, maybe you want to take a break halfway through and swap it out, so that you're not having that possible exposure to bacteria growing in your mask over the course of an 8 or a 10-hour workday.
From what I understood, when this got released on Facebook, one of the things that people took the most exception to was the fact that 2-year-olds had to wear masks. And another component of it is, we were getting to this point where we were stopping to wear masks, right? And it feels like for a lot of people, feels like we're going backwards. But the reality is this is a new situation. This isn't even the same virus. It's a variant of the virus that we're talking about now, right? And I think some people don't acknowledge that we're not talking 16 months ago or 18 months ago. We're talking something somewhat new.
Yep. And one of the things I've been watching is just the graph of infections over time in the state of Massachusetts. And we are definitely, if you compare where we are right now on the graph to where we were last year, we had significantly fewer infections at this point of the year last year, we're way up from there. And by the time we got to maybe late October into November of last year, you start seeing a big upward curve in the rate of infection. And if we have that big upward curve from where we are now, we're going to be in trouble.
As I understand it, though, the good news is because such a high percentage of New Englanders are vaccinated, we're talking about less deaths, though, and less serious hospitalizations. Is that
Yeah,
accurate?
and that's definitely reflected in the data that if you look at the infection curves, you can see that we're riding up another big spike, or less of a spike and more of a wave. But the deaths, the curve of deaths has not increased.
It's fantastic.
So we're still transmitting, but people aren't dying from it as much, and so that's good news.
That's fantastic.
And another thing we were mentioning earlier, unintended consequences, and I think one of the more interesting unintended kind of side effects of all these masks that we're wearing is now actual flu infections are way down
Mm-hmm.
Oh, that's great.
last year. And it's unlikely that we're going to eradicate the flu by wearing masks, but the number of people who have gotten the flu has been just remarkably low. And that's, I think, a really
That's
interesting
exciting.
side effect that nobody really saw coming until the data started coming in.
Mm-hmm.
And it's like, oh yeah, the thing that we're doing to fight COVID also fights influenza. And it's doing a very good job of that. And so that's, I think, a point in favor of masks that nobody's really talking about too much. But it's something that I noticed that I think is really interesting.
Yeah, and we were talking about masks quite a bit. An interesting observation when I met you two for the first time. Typically I would have shaken your hand for the first time and said, "Hey, pleased to meet you," but we don't do handshakes quite as often as we used to, too. So I think it's both the masks and changes in some of our, built-in cultural traditions of even greeting people and saying goodbye to people. I think that has something to do with it too, right?
Yep. Yeah, definitely. And my dad was in the military. I was a military brat for the first decade of my life, so I kind of default to the salute, and that works well for me. But I also I kind of like the Japanese tradition of just a little bit of a head bow, almost like a nod. I think there's lots of ways that we can greet each other that don't necessarily involve exchanging bacteria on our hands.
What though? It's going to get weird if you do a head nod and then I do a fist bump or an elbow bump.
Yeah.
We're all going to get really confused about what we're supposed to be doing.
We got to pick a lane.
We need to agree. That's exactly right. That's going to cause chaos.
So the Board of Health put out their official notice of the mask mandate on Facebook, and there's been some conversation and not all friendly conversation around this. People have their opinions and are not afraid to express them when they're sitting at a keyboard.
Yeah, I'm not surprised.
Yeah, I found I actually, as I mentioned, I heard about the mandate from the town for the first time on social media, and I didn't know what it was. I picked it open, and then as soon as you go to the first comment, you start to hear the outrage, and it seems like that's the way social media works today. The first reaction to things isn't just, oh, well, maybe this isn't a good decision. Maybe I'm not sure. It's instant outrage. And if you go to either the community page on Facebook, the Westford community page, or the Board of Health page, you can see that very quickly that it turns into this class warfare kind of thing too, about how many years you've been a resident. You need to prove that you've lived here for 50 years, and then your parents lived here for 50 years before that in order to have a voice. And other weird things start to come out about tension in town that's under the surface from this initial announcement. I don't know if you've seen any of that. It's super interesting.
What other things have come out?
So I moved here in November 2019, and so I haven't been here for 2 years yet, but I come here for the schools like so many people, and the typical pattern, as I understand it, is you move here before your kids in kindergarten, get them into the Westford school system, and you stay here until the kid minimum graduates college. That's 20 plus years, right? That's being embedded in your community, I think, if you live somewhere for 20 years. And yet there's a class of people on Facebook who are quite vocal referring to these kind of people as blow-ins, like leaf blow-ins. And I was thinking about that. I don't know where else in my life I've been somewhere for 20 years and been called a blow-in. I think that's quite interesting. But there seems to be some issue about the changing composition of town. Is it becoming more progressive or more liberal? Is there a higher income level moving in? There seems to be a lot of class questions raised in underlying the surface of these.
Yeah, well, and I feel like that saying how long you've been here is kind of a common trope that you'll come across at town meeting and in select board meetings. People who have been here for a long time want to let you know that they've been around for a long time because they think it establishes some sort of credibility. And really, Westford went through a major change in the 90s where it used to be actually a very small rural town. And there was an explosion of growth throughout the 90s. And my family moved to town in kind of the end of that in 99. And so there is a little bit of a distinction between people who have been around long enough to remember what Westford was like versus people who are a little newer to town and maybe don't remember what it was like when it was actually rural. But yeah, I would say that it's not really a helpful distinction. It's not really giving people the credibility that they seem to think that it does. It just kind of seems to be a way of saying, well, my opinion is more valuable than yours because I've been here for 40, 50 years.
And this came up on the drive-through topic too, not too long ago, that's a whole other thing. But when people were arguing in favor of drive-throughs, people who had been here for 30, 40, 50 years said, well, the town's never had drive-throughs and we did just fine. So it's interesting, again, the length of time someone's lived here, they use it somewhat like a club to say, I have more of a voice than you people who just moved here. So I think that's interesting. That's one example, that the length of time someone's lived here, and then the nature of the income levels, the political beliefs, that comes out very quickly in the Facebook page.
Mm-hmm.
I'd imagine in some of the other forms of social media, but predominantly Facebook in these discussions. If a lot of residents like me are hearing for the first time about mandates on social media, on Facebook, that may not be the channel that the town wants to be the first place where people find out information of such a scale. Because then you're at the mercy of, well, what does this mean? And you naturally go down to the comments and see, oh my gosh, people feel very strongly about this. And I don't know if it's the best way for the town to make announcements, but it's an easy way to reach people.
Thanks for listening. Before we continue, I have a couple of quick announcements. Westford's special town meeting has had its date and location moved. It will now be held Saturday, October 16th on the WA football field at 1 p.m. WestfordCAT is working with students from Westford Academy to record and broadcast high school sports. On Friday, October 8th, WA football will be hosting Newton South, and our students will be streaming the game live on YouTube and our TV channels at 7 p.m. Did you know that you can support WestfordCAT every time you order something from Amazon? Just go to smile.amazon.com and select WestfordCAT as your designated charity, and then do your shopping through the Amazon Smile program to have a portion of your cart donated to the station every time you make a purchase. That's a great, simple, easy, and nearly free way to support local journalism in Westford. All right, so let's talk about this protest on the Common. Nick, do you want to bring up the picture that we had?
Yeah, so there are about 12 people in that photo. And still, the sun was shining and it's bright out. And unexpectedly, our CEO was driving by and noticed that they were holding a rally to protest the mask mandate. So, when you're a journalist and you hear about something like this, you jump right in. So that was fortunate that I was sitting at my computer and just whipped off a story, and we got breaking news.
Steve and Joyce, something that's interesting. So this is the first time I'm seeing this photo, and for the people listening on the podcast, there's many of the protesters have signs. What I think is interesting is the diversity of language that's used on the signs. So I was talking earlier about the toxicity of Facebook, and this is the real world spillover effect. The words we say online do have real world impact, and it causes some people. There's 25,000 residents in Westford, something like this. 24,000 and 12 people are on the common. So what you hear on social media is this amplified voice of sometimes it can be an extremely small percentage of people who are just really angry, but it does spill over into the real world. And when I look at the actual messaging on here, it's interesting because it ranges from messages about the children having to wear masks, don't mask healthy kids, no forced masks. Then there's kind of commentary about government mandates. But then the extreme version says COVID is a hoax. So it's interesting to see the spectrum of things that come out into these. That just I hadn't seen that before. This diversity of the signs.
Yeah, well, in the spring, I think it was, there were a lot of rallies held on the Common, so we sort of got good at covering them. It was Black Lives Matter. That was one rally. I can't remember some of the others, but lots of people came to those. So the spillover in that case, they had a broader community, I assume, and the rallies were quite massive.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, there was one moment when I was in the middle of Main Street, and the group of protesters were coming up Main Street. They were in the middle of the street. There must have been about 100 to 200 people. And I'm standing in the middle of the street to get the photo, because when you're operating that fast, you're really not thinking of your safety. You're just thinking of getting that photo. And suddenly I realized these people were going to trample me if I didn't get out of the way really quickly. So it was, and every time I played the video, I took a video of them marching up the street. Every time I play that video, I still get scared. Yeah, I mean, it's one mindset when people move in a group like that. It's kind of an intriguing development.
Yeah, get a little bit of that mob mentality.
Yes, that's it. Yeah.
No, it's interesting. Like I said, if there's 25,000 people in town and you see 12 on the Common, does it, what's representative of town opinion? Is it those loud voices on Facebook or in the Common, or are the vast majority of people okay with a mask mandate?
Yeah, and that's a very valid point. You don't hear the people who are being quiet.
Yeah.
And so, is there a silent majority? And it's hard to really know unless you can directly poll everybody. And social media isn't really a very scientific environment for that kind of polling to happen.
No, I think people, they misunderstand. They say, well, there's 3 people on Facebook who agree with me, therefore the other 24,000 people in town must agree with me. Well, that's not necessarily representative.
Yep.
And that's the trouble town meeting has as well.
Yes.
That's why we need to get more people showing up to town meeting,
Mm-hmm.
have better diversity of opinions, diversity of ideas, and really get a better representation of what everybody thinks.
Mm-hmm.
One thing that I noticed looking at these signs is that I can read them all. And I think that in the age of the internet, now that everybody is kind of exposed to memes, and particularly image format memes, I think people's kind of literacy about readability has gotten better. I know a lot of protests from 10, 15, 20 years ago, you go look at the pictures and a lot of the signs are drawn in like a single line Sharpie, and you can't read them from more than 10 feet away.
Mm.
And I think just the overall, the literacy of people to be able to create this media that you're going to hold up and show people, people's sign game has gotten a little bit better, that we're better at crafting short, concise messages that will fit on a sign. And we're better at designing signs that are actually going to be noticed and be visible from more than a few feet away.
Yeah, and Joyce, you said something. You mentioned a previous protest in the Common around Black Lives Matter.
Mm-hmm.
And what I noticed is one of the signs that are, and I hope people are able to see this photo later, it says, "We can't breathe." And it's interesting how, we've had a lot of issues in the last 18 months. And it seems to me like this person is actually making an intentional comparison between a mask mandate to deal with COVID in children and the Black Lives Matter in a negative correlation way. They're trying to mock in some way by picking those specific words, which were actually used as part of the Black Lives Matter. So it's just interesting to see the blend of topics actually here underlying these simple signs, people conveying their political beliefs.
Well, and something that I pick up on kind of along those lines is that then there's this woman with the green sign saying, "My child, my choice, hands off our kids." My choice is another kind of politically charged statement from the abortion debate.
That's right.
And it is interesting kind of seeing how the language kind of gets co-opted and goes in all of these different directions. And
That's right.
language is so kind of loose that you can use it however you want. Follow your own interpretation.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, but I'll be just for the record, I'll be wearing my mask indoors, and my family will be as well. We're close to the finish line in terms of children. My daughter will be able to get vaccinated in the near future, and
Okay.
I want to get to that. I'd like to get to that finish line as I perceive it. So
yeah, well, and that really, from the discussions that I've heard, seems like the key is once we can get the younger kids under 12 vaccinated, then we hopefully will be able to ease off a little bit on some of the restrictions. But that is kind of the biggest population at this point that is at risk of not so much getting sick. Kids aren't, I think, dying from COVID so much, but they are a very strong vector for transmission at this point, relative to everybody who is older and has had the chance to get vaccinated.
That's right. Yeah.
Now we're going to take a quick break and come back for more after a word from our station.
WestfordCAT is more than just television. We have the equipment and knowledge to help you get started as an independent media creator. Find us on YouTube for local news, Westford Academy sports, and media content created by Westford neighbors and friends. Or look up our website at westfordcat.org for details about the station and how to get involved. Funding for local media is on the decline, so if you appreciate our work, please become a member of the station or make a tax-deductible donation to support local media. Links are in the description. Thanks for tuning in.
All right, we're back with more news and discussion. Just a quick reminder, links to these stories are in the description if you want more information. Final story is a logging plan at East Boston camps. And so this is an environmental topic, and Westford loves its trees. Whenever you bring up any kind of plan to cut down trees, you always have people coming out and saying, well wait, let's take another look at this. And Westford is a very strong conservation town. We have a lot of open space in town, or not so much open, but wooded space and wetlands, and people love their trees.
I wasn't able to attend in person, but I did actually watch the replay of it. It was about 1 hour of the total Conservation Commission's meeting a couple days ago, and there were people sitting out in the hallway. It was such an important topic. I think there was 35, maybe 50 total people there. But that's a large number for a town committee meeting that on this topic. It kind of relates to what we were talking about a minute ago with using social media as a primary communications vector. I didn't know about this East Boston camp plan, just like I didn't know about the mandate. And yet this is another thing I discovered through town Facebook. And it's already charged with did you hear they're going to cut down the forest? And whoa, what's going on? Why are they cutting down the forest? And of all places, like at the East Boston camps, so if the first place you hear news is Facebook, that's really like already got you on the back foot if you're trying to push something, even if it was a positive. And I thought I would share here from the management summary. This actually comes from the plan that the Conservation Commission had put out from the forestry group. The landowner would specifically like to accomplish the following on this property, because I was wondering what is the purpose of this? What? Because if the first thing you hear is we're cutting down trees, wait, what?
Yeah, why?
And what it says here is there's just 6 bullet points here. It says enhance bird habitat, improve timber resources, promote biological diversity, enhance recreation and aesthetics, enhance other native wildlife habitats, and create opportunities for public education. And when you hear that, the first thing that they say is enhance bird habitat.
Yeah, 3 of those 6 don't make any sense to me.
Yeah, so even trying to be informed, you hear on Facebook, did you know they're going to cut down trees? And you say, well, let me read about this. And you try to, and the very first thing that says there is, we're going to enhance the bird habitat.
By taking away all the bird homes.
So I can't, okay. And then you move on, improve timber resources. What does that mean? Improve timber resources we're going to cut down the trees and improve the timber resources. I do care about the environment. I do try to stay informed, but it's already, okay, we're going to promote biological diversity.
By cutting down trees,
right? So I'm trying to
habitat,
and then you get to enhance recreation and aesthetics. That seems plausible.
Yep.
Enhance other native wildlife habitats, but
maybe if you're going for like small animals that live in the ground.
Yeah, and then create opportunities for public education. I can't.
Well, we're talking about it, aren't we?
We are. I I think there's a thing about messaging in this town. This happened with drive-throughs. This happens with, we just talked about the mask mandate. Now we're talking about tree cutting. It seems like a pattern that repeats where the first time people are exposed to news items and then they even try to get informed, it's like, wait, what are we doing? Why are we giving McDonald's a drive-through? Why are we cutting down trees at East Boston camps? And you're not getting the background information, just these snippets, you know?
Well, this was a classic case of people getting rallied for nothing, in the sense that the plan that you just mentioned was written. Peter Maller is the chairman of this committee, and they used a plan that had been written for another piece of land. I don't know, maybe Mark, no, but it's a plan that had already been in place for a different parcel, I think it was. And so what the board was trying to do was just have a plan out there for this area of the town. And Peter had to say it a few times before it actually sunk in to the crowd in the room that they weren't going to be clearing, East Boston camps of trees. They just needed a plan on record. So it was fascinating to watch from, as I said, the human point of view. I watched it on TV, and people were very, very hepped up and riled and angry at the beginning of the meeting, and then with good communication, the committees calmed everyone down, and people left much, with a much better attitude and feeling about the situation.
Yeah. What I struggle with, so another example just came to my mind. When the former superintendent of schools was talking about, I don't remember if this was April or May 2020. It was later in 2020, talking about the plan for hybrid schooling. And I was a part of every one of those video calls, and you say, wait a minute, why did you make this decision? Why did you make that decision? You feel like decisions are being made that directly impact you and your family. In some cases, the East Boston camps, a lot of people use that for recreation, for mushroom foraging, for camping, skiing.
Mm-hmm.
And people say, well, some decisions are being made, and I feel like my voice is completely left out of it. I didn't understand the Westford Schools plan for kindergartners, as an example. And even when I signed on and made my comments, I didn't feel like those comments went anywhere. So I think there's some things the town can do better about sharing their message, and then sharing the background of how they got to that decision, and doing a better job of incorporating feedback from town members. I don't know. Do you guys share that opinion that when you hear about something from the town, it feels like it's already decided, and the first time you've heard about it, it's literally on the doorstep of being implemented? Do you know what I mean?
I do know what you mean. I think that comes from not being able to be, because of time, like I have children, but not being able to be sort of in the nucleus of what's happening. And I think over time, this is a town that kind of, it's a small town, so there isn't always a room for everyone. But Mark, you found a great project to, give back to the town on with the litter control. So when you're not feeling like you're in the center, I do think it just has to do with sort of working your way there. The doors don't always open that readily, but they eventually do. That's my only advice.
Yeah, and I've definitely heard this concern come up a lot. But from where I sit, like I go to a lot of government meetings because I'm covering the meeting and recording it and broadcasting it, and so I tend to hear about things kind of as they come down the pipeline. And I think what's frustrating for a lot of town committee members is that they talk about things and they'll have like 3 different discussions at 3 different meetings, and no one will attend to participate in the meeting. And then the night that they're set to vote on it, somebody will have posted on Facebook, hey, the board is making this decision. We all need to show up and protest. And like the night that the decision is meant to be made, after they've kind of done all the information gathering and they're coming in with their opinions set, that's when people show up to voice their opinions. And so I think it gets back to this kind of fundamental disconnect about communication in town, and not having like a kind of a good channel for the town to really get out there and connect with people and say, this is what's coming down the pipeline. And so like, one of my projects is 10-Minute Citizen, where I take a select board meeting and I cut it down to just a 10-minute summary. And that's been my attempt at kind of getting some of that information out there. Because unless you really sit and watch all the select board meetings, you might not know kind of all the different issues and different topics that they talk about, and something could very easily just slip by. And I think a lot of things do slip by that way. And so that was one of the things that I wanted to do with 10-Minute Citizen, was kind of give a quick way for people to just get a broad overview of what's being discussed, what's coming down the pipeline. Are there important topics that I need to pay attention to? And there isn't really a good way to do that for every committee, unless you have an army of people doing the things that I've been doing with 10-Minute Citizen. But that's a lot of work. It takes 8 to 10 hours for me to put together an episode, so that's not a small time commitment.
I think that's interesting. When I was growing up, there was a program called Channel 1 News. I don't know if you guys know what that is, but they put TVs in the classroom and they showed a very short 15-minute, around the world kind of news segment. And it was younger news anchors, maybe 10 years older than me at the time. And but during homeroom, we would watch that 10-minute, 15-minute news program and have some sense of what was going on in the world, and then go back and maybe talk to your friends or talk to your parents about it. I think a similar thing in Westford would be useful. There's a lot going on, and it does impact the kids that live here, And again, I don't want to rehash the drive-through thing, but with the first time I heard that there was going to be a special meeting of the Zoning Board of Appeals, and the town meeting had literally just said no, had literally just voted no, maybe 30 days prior to drive-throughs. 2 days before or 3 days before that special zone of appeals, I didn't even know that board existed. I hear, oh, we're going to talk about drive-throughs again. Wait a minute. I thought we just talked about this. And so that's how I found out about East Boston camps. That's how you found out about the mask mandate. It's always 2 days before the vote's going to happen. You say, wait a minute, what's going on?
Yep.
So I think something like your program, 10-Minute Citizen, or the Channel 1 News kind of thing in the schools would help maybe distribute a little better.
Yeah, well, and zoning board is one of those committees that very much flies under the radar until something like that pops up. And I will tell you, from having sat and watched the zoning board for a long time, there was no chance that they were ever going to approve the McDonald's drive-through, no matter how hard McDonald's argued it. That board is not going to go against the will of town meeting like that. Unless they have like 500 people show up and are all supporting it, then they might get the sense that, oh, well, maybe there is a big faction in town that actually does want this. But what I see in the McDonald's discussion is that the people who don't want it have very strong opinions. Whereas the people who do want it are just kind of like, yeah, it'd be nice to have. And so which of those is going to get you to show up? The strong opinion or the whatever?
So shame on me, though, and this was a lack of knowledge of local government. I didn't know that. First, I didn't know that board existed. 1. 2, they actually could have overturned the town meeting decision. It was in their full right. In the definition of the Zoning Board of Appeals bylaws, they are able to make that decision. So when I understood that, and I said, wait a minute, I didn't know this board existed yesterday. I didn't realize they could overturn a town meeting vote. Now that gets you spun up, and I think that's what happens. That's when you end up with people in the common protesting, saying, when they don't have an understanding, like me, of how the local government actually operates and the charter of local government. And so that's something we need to do a better job as a community of understanding what boards exist and what their by right powers are.
Yep. To the point that a lot of people don't know about some of these quieter committees. And every couple of years we have town elections, and you have the opportunity to go elect somebody into a policy-making board like the planning board. And some of those boards do have the ability to overturn the will of town meeting if they decide to. And I think there's a lot of kind of missing information about what these boards do and what they can do and how you can influence them. That it's a kind of a big open question of how do we get that information out there? How do we get people engaged to the point where they understand all of these different committees? And, watching the zoning board meetings is like, you think select board meetings are boring. The zoning board is like watching the grass grow.
Yeah.
People don't tend to show up to those meetings unless they have an item on the agenda that directly affects them. And so kind of how do you get the word out about what's going on and what the discussions are at these meetings? And we're back to this idea of there needs to be like your Channel 1 program, the just some way of having a single kind of a source that the town can go to and say, this is the information that we want to get out. And then that the people in Westford can go to and say, this is where we're going to get our primary information.
Yeah.
And that there isn't really like a kind of a good single point of contact for that right now. And I think that would be something that we should discuss as a community of do we want to set up like maybe an official channel of some sort that is specifically for government information to disseminate to citizens.
Yeah, no, it's interesting, and I think people need to understand the importance of voting. I think we should all understand that. But when we vote for our school committee members, they make very real decisions, and for all the elected officials, we have to participate. We talk about this with town meeting. There's a whole committee set up now to improve the attendance of town meeting. I would love to see Westford really take advantage of the talent, the intellectual and tech talent that's in town, and move into become a little bit more digital. I think people would participate in these meetings and would let their voice be heard if it was a little more digital. And so digital voting, for instance, is an example of how town meeting could be improved if people were able to sign in and actually say, this is how I feel, in a secure way, we hope. I think there's more we can do digitally to try and get people engaged.
I will say, though, in defense of the town, it was at the last town meeting that town manager Jody Ross tried to get approval for the handheld devices for when the town moderator during town meeting can't distinguish the number of votes and isn't sure. Everything stops. This is before devices. Everything stops and the poll workers come out and I guess they're called poll workers. I don't know. But come out and do a count. And that takes sometimes 10 to 15 minutes.
Oh, it's slow.
And
it's
you
slow.
can't know whether it's accurate or not. Whereas these handheld devices would have, covered all of that, taking care of the uncertainty. And town's citizens did not vote in favor of it.
Well, I think just the lead into that was not well handled. And again, getting into the recurring discussion point of how do you get this information out to the town? A lot of people, I think, were caught off guard by the clickers and didn't hear anything about it, didn't know anything about it until they showed up to the meeting and were told that we're going to vote with clickers tonight. And there were a lot of strong objections to that. And really, I think one of the problems with the way it was presented was that the developer behind those clickers was not present at the meeting to defend his technology and really kind of dig into this is how it works on the back end. Because I know that the town brought him out to do a presentation to town staff, and I was invited to that. And he did a very good job of like, I went in with a lot of those same concerns about security and verifiability and all those sorts of things. And he did a very good job of explaining this is how it works and this is how we know it's reliable on the back end. And I think if he had been there to defend his product, I think the discussion might have gone in a different direction. But yeah, that's definitely something that we want. And I know the current town moderator, Angela Harkness, has said that we are going to bring clickers back at some point and try again.
Yeah, I'm sure they will.
Yeah, I've been to 2 town meetings now, and it needs help. But I will say, in a weird way, town meeting gives me hope for democracy, and I can't fully articulate it yet. It's still kind of cooking in my head, but it's like you sit through and you're like, this is terrible, this doesn't work, but then it kind of does work. All you had to do is show up. So it works perfectly well for the people who show up.
Yep.
And it's that simple, isn't it?
And
it's a little inefficient, to be sure, but it kind of works in a weird way.
Yeah, and it's the only place in America where you get to directly represent yourself in government and cast a vote for what you want to see.
Yeah.
Kind of everywhere else in America, we use not direct democracy, but a more lowercase r Republican form of government, where you are electing a representative and then that representative is voting on your behalf. And is there necessarily enough granularity in the number of representatives that are elected to represent all of the viewpoints and make sure that your voice gets heard?
And that seems to be a common theme in our topics today when we, people who are discovering about what's happening at the East Boston camps, they say, well, wait a minute, I don't feel represented by the people who are making this decision. They feel this is our East Boston camps. Similarly with the mask mandate for right or wrong, people say, well, I don't feel like the Board of Health spoke to me, or I don't feel represented by them, right or wrong. They don't feel that they're enfranchised. So
Yeah, and if you go back to kind of the original form of democracy, which was Athens, ancient Athens, in the BC times, the form of democracy that they had was kind of the most participatory democracy that has ever existed. And it still was only the landowning men, but it was basically all of the landowners, anybody who had any kind of stake in the Athenian community, all came together
had a vote.
and got a vote.
Yeah.
And democracy today doesn't really hold up to that ideal just because people are busy and they have other things to worry about. They don't necessarily make the time to come in and participate.
Mm-hmm.
And so what can we do to make it easier for folks to participate? And you mentioned the committee to increase participation. I'm on that committee, and one of the things that I'm pushing for really hard is exactly what you were talking about, some form of digital participation, and a way to maybe cast a vote from your home using an app while you're watching the meeting on WestfordCAT, rather than having to show up.
And we do this, I don't know how many years the show Survivor's been on, but maybe 25, 30, it feels like forever. A long time. But now it's a part of the culture where you have a reasonable expectation of watching a television show, a competition show, American Idol or X Factor or any of these, and actually voting in it. And having your vote, if not in real time, maybe within 24 hours counted. The technology is there. We could have it tomorrow. It might cost some money. But if the goal is participation in these kind of topics like we discussed today, if the goal is to hear as many voices as humanly possible before making a decision, the technology is there. It's there. There's no barrier there beyond cost,
Mm-hmm.
Whether people use it or not, though.
Right.
Whether they show up and actually participate, I don't know.
Thanks for listening, folks. We hope this leaves you a little better informed about your town. If you like this episode, tell YouTube to share it with your neighbors by hitting that like button, and tell us what you think about these stories in the comments below. Thanks again to Nick for recording, to Joyce for telling us what's new in Westford, and to Mark for showing up and talking about the issues.
Thanks for having me, guys.